Hello everyone, my name is Philip and with me today are Jin and Noah. In this video, we are presenting about some different economic factors that affect our health on a global scale. Specifically, we want to talk about the impact of economic production on citizens' physical well-being. The reason is because of the current pandemic situation, which we will elaborate in the next slide.
Yeah, like Philip said, our research question was how do different national priorities affect human health? And I think this question is especially important given the current coronavirus pandemic, and we are seeing governments responding in very different ways. For example, here in the US, different states are being shut down, and the government recently decided to pass this $2 trillion stimulus package where they are going to allocate money to different parts of the economy in the hopes of improving it and preventing further damage. And we wanted to see how these types of decisions affect human health.
Now, we will talk about our dataset from the CIA Word Factbook. To begin with, according to Wikipedia, the Factbook is a 2 to 3 page summary of the demographics, geography, communications, government, economy, and military of each of the 267 international entities, including U.S. recognized country, dependency, and other areas around the world. Professor Kuiper provided us with the dataset, which was prepared by another group from a previous semester. This group were interested in terrorism, and they did a very good job of cleaning the data, so we did not have to do any further cleaning of our dataset. Our dataset covers a total of 13 years, from 1998 to 2010. There are 12 regions represented, which we will cover in the next slide. Among the 38 variable measured, we found a few of them interesting to look at, and Noah will elaborate on them.
Yeah, so our key variable of interest was namely GDP, because RUM in 2000 found that slight increases in GDP that were higher than expected led to an increased mortality rate among developed nations. More specifically, Cutler et al. Found that these increases were a result of pollution. Um, Therefore, we wanted to look at energy use. And then we wanted to see how these two variables related to life expectancy and child mortality rate. We were also interested in looking at the year, the region, and the primary religion of these countries. And Jin will get into why we looked at primary religion later on.
In order to examine the relationships between the variables of interest, we built an app that makes a scatter plot based on the variables you choose. Here's the app. On the left, you can select different x and y variables and the variable to color code by. You can either choose the year you want to look at or hit the play button to watch the graph progress through consecutive years. If the data is colored by primary religion, you can choose to add a linear or lowest model to the graph if desired. Due to some issues with the formatting of the data for region, only the linear model is available if the data is colored by region. Here, we are graphing child mortality rate by GDP per capita with linear modeling colored by region. The preliminary research we did, which Noah talked about on the previous slide, suggested that increasing GDP may initially decrease child mortality rates, but after the GDP increases to a certain point, further increases to GDP then increase child mortality rates. The graphs produced here support these claims. As you can see, over on the left end of the graph, child mortality rates decrease rapidly with increases in GDP per capita when GDP is low. However, on the right side of the graph, notice the pink line modeling data from Western European countries. Western Europe has some of the highest GDPs per capita, and unlike other regions, Western Europe has a slight increase in child mortality rate with the increase in GDP. The increase is not very large, but matches the trends described in the preliminary research. Many studies suggest that it's not economic growth itself that accounts for the decrease in health measures, but rather increased pollution that accompanies increased production. In order to investigate this idea, we graphed life expectancy by energy use per capita, colored by region. Like in the previous graph, the health measure improves as the explanatory variable increases, but only when the explanatory variable is low. Once energy use per capita reaches a certain point, increasing energy use per capita seems to correspond to a decrease in life expectancy. When energy use per capita is low, increased energy use may denote factors like increased water filtration, which contribute to better health and longer life expectancy. Once general health needs are met with the tools that are enabled by energy use, negative impacts of pollution caused by energy use begin to outweigh the positive effects of increased energy use, which may have negative impacts on health and life expectancy. The graphs shown here support the idea that the negative health effects of increasing already high GDP may be due to pollution rather than economic. While examining the graphs made by our app, we noticed that in the graph of child mortality rate by Human Development Index, lowest models show different trends for different religions. On the left side of the graph, where human development is low, countries with different primary religions tend to have substantial differences between child mortality rates. On the right side of the graph, where human development index is high, the trends converge and all countries have similarly low child mortality rates, regardless of primary religion. We were interested in finding out why this might be and began looking for possible explanations. We found a research study that suggests that in developing areas, mothers' participation in religion reduces child mortality rates because involvement in religion connects the mother and child to networks that may have improved access to healthcare resources or institutions. The graphs shown here seem to support this idea because different religions likely have access to different networks, so they have different levels of impacts on child mortality rates in countries with lower human development scores.
Do another demonstration of a new explanatory variable and a new response variable. So here we go. I choose my x variable to be military expenditure, I choose my y variable to be child mortality rate, color them by region, and I take linear to show them a new model for my data. As you can see here, there is a strong or weak negative correlation between the amount of GDP accounted for by military expenditure and the child mortality rate in many regions in the world throughout this 13-year period. However, in Eastern Europe and East Asia, this correlation is relatively positive throughout the 13-year period. Also noticeable is the pattern in North America. In North America, the correlation between military expenditure and child mortality rate stays fairly negative until 2008, and from there it changes to strongly positive in 2010. The proportion of GDP taken up by military expenditure in North America is also increasing with time, as you can see the lengthening of the light blue line. The video is just looping for your convenience.
Our main conclusion is that there may be peak levels of GDP and energy use that maximize the best health outcomes, particularly life expectancy and child mortality. Our findings generally support RUM's work in that in these developed countries, increases in GDP actually detract from these indices of human health. Child health is also particularly vulnerable when you factor in energy use, which is a good measure of pollution, which is what Cutler et al.'s work focused on. Additionally, religion may act as an institutional and social support against child mortality in less developed countries that don't have as strong access to healthcare, whereas in more developed countries, healthcare acts as the primary defense against child mortality rates, which supports work by Kwa et al.
And here is a list of our references for this presentation. On behalf of my group, I'm really sad that we cannot have a live Q&A session and answer your questions more directly and quickly. If you have any further questions for us, you can use your phone camera to scan this barcode and ask us, or you can post your question in our group discussion on PioneerWeb. We will try to answer them as fast as possible. Once again, thank you for spending your time watching our presentation. Please stay well and safe, and don't forget to practice social distancing.